It was an accidental encounter that changed everything. My millionaire sister found me, a homeless and exhausted woman, sleeping beneath a bridge, utterly forgotten. She'd just learned the horrific truth. My own children had abused me, stolen my home, and then cruelly cast me out. Without a moment's hesitation, she purchased a beautiful beachfront condo for me and immediately provided a staggering $5 million to help me restart my life. Just a few days later, my children, with fake smiles and flowers in hand, showed up, but both my sister and I saw right through their shallow facade. The cruel reality, the one that led me to that bridge, began when my own son, in a fit of rage, threw my suitcase into the pouring rain and screamed that I was nothing but a burden. At 72 years old, I found myself shivering, alone under that cold bridge, my dignity washed away by the storm and my tears. I felt utterly abandoned, as if all the years I had dedicated to raising him had been erased in a single, brutal night. But fate, it seemed, had other, far kinder plans. The moment my sister discovered me there, everything irrevocably shifted. My children believed I would remain silent, broken, and compliant. They were wrong. A powerful storm of truth was brewing, and it was about to utterly destroy their carefully constructed lies forever. My worn suitcase hit the slick pavement with a wet, heavy thud. The rain was relentless, not stopping, but pouring down as if the very sky itself was weeping, or perhaps angry on my behalf. My son stood framed in the doorway, arms tightly crossed, his face a mask of cold disgust. This time, there was no need for shouting. He didn't have to utter a single word. The suffocating silence between us spoke volumes, making his decision perfectly clear. I had no place left in his house, and, devastatingly, no place left in his life either. I didn't beg. My pride, though shattered, wouldn't allow it. I simply picked up my suitcase, already soaked through by the time my shaking hands reached the sidewalk. My slippers squished miserably with every step as I shuffled out into the unforgiving storm. No umbrella, no coat, just a thin sweater that had offered meager warmth a mere 2 hours before. Behind me, the door slammed shut with a finality that echoed, a sound that would linger in my mind far longer than I cared to admit. That night, I didn't cry. Instead, I just walked, one foot in front of the other, until my legs eventually gave out. I found a low, crumbling concrete wall beneath an overpass, just off the busy main road. It offered no safety. It was far from dry, but crucially it was hidden. I pulled my saturated suitcase beneath me, leaned my aching body against the cold wall, and listened to the relentless sound of tires splashing through puddles on the street above. My body hurt in every fiber, but the pain in my chest, a deep hollow ache, was far worse. My bones felt like fragile paper, and my heart like cold ash. A few people passed by, their hurried footsteps echoing. Not a single person looked twice. To them, I was just another anonymous homeless woman in a city overflowing with them. That, more than anything, was the part that truly terrified me. I didn't feel like myself anymore. I felt utterly invisible, discarded like a piece of refuse. His voice replayed in my head, the way he had spat the word burden, as if I were nothing more than a chore, as if all the countless years I'd dedicated to raising him had simply never happened. I remembered every scraped knee I had kissed better, every meal I had skipped so he could eat his fill. And now, in his eyes, I was merely a weight and inconvenience. The wind grew sharper, cutting deeper the longer I sat there. I pulled the thin, damp blanket I'd found in my suitcase tighter around me, but my body shook anyway, not just from the biting cold, but from the searing shame, from the sheer, crushing disbelief. Perhaps some of you understand that gut-wrenching feeling, when the very people you gave absolutely everything to look at you as if you were nothing at all. That night, sleep was a distant luxury. I lay awake, listening to the passing cars, the distant wail of sirens, and the sound of something profound and essential breaking apart inside me. Around 3 in the morning, the rain finally slowed to a drizzle. I was just beginning to drift into a shallow sleep when I heard footsteps. They weren't hurried, not heavy, but measured, deliberate. I looked up, and for a fleeting second, I genuinely thought I was dreaming. Vivian. It was my little sister. Her hair was completely soaked, her makeup long gone. But she looked at me with an intensity, as if she hadn't truly seen me in 20 years. And perhaps, in a way, she hadn't. We hadn't spoken much since she moved to Florida. Life, as it often does, had simply gotten in the way. Family things complicated things. But there she was, standing before me like a miracle, wrapped in the fabric of a trench coat and radiating a fierce fury. She didn't say anything at first. She just knelt down beside me, gently brushed the wet, clinging hair from my face, and placed her hand firmly on mine. And that was it. That simple gesture was the first real human touch I had felt in weeks, perhaps even months. Without a single word, she helped me to my feet. She picked up my soaked suitcase and led me to her rental car as if it were the most natural, obvious thing in the world. There were no questions, no judgment, just quiet, unwavering presence. I sat in her car, the heat blasting on full, a blanket wrapped securely around my shoulders, fighting desperately to hold myself together. She handed me a thermos of tea, still warm, fragrant with the soothing scent of honey and mint. I took a tentative sip and felt the first flicker of safety, a delicate warmth spreading through me, since I had been forced to leave that house. We didn't speak again until we hit the highway. "You're coming with me," she stated, her voice firm. I simply nodded, not because I entirely agreed, but because I honestly couldn't imagine going anywhere else. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. I think she saw it all in my face, in the way I clutched the thermos with both hands, as if it were the only thing I had left in the entire world. The road stretched long and silent before us. Every few miles I glanced at her profile. The same determined eyes, the same straight, unyielding back. Vivian had always been fire where I was water. She burned with indignation when people hurt her. I, on the other hand, endured. I survived. But that night, I started to wonder if simply surviving was truly enough. When we finally reached the motel just outside Tallahassee, she handed me a room key and a bag overflowing with clean clothes. I took a hot shower, the first in what felt like days, scrubbing off not just the rain and the dirt, but the raw, stinging humiliation. I stared at my reflection in the mirror until the steam mercifully blurred my face. Then I slept. Not deeply, not peacefully, but I slept. In a bed. And the next morning, when she calmly told me we would be heading south to Clearwater, I didn't ask why. I simply followed because something profound had shifted inside me. Not all at once, not with a loud declaration, but enough for me to distinctly feel it. Maybe you felt it too. That quiet internal turn. That defining moment when you realize, asterisk this time, I'm not going to let it go. This time, I'm not swallowing my pain just to keep a false peace. Not when it costs me absolutely everything. Asterisk if you've ever had someone you love treat you like garbage. If you've ever had to pick yourself up off the ground with nothing but your shredded pride and aching joints, then perhaps you'll understand what I did next. And trust me, it wouldn't be pretty, but it would be undeniably fair. The next morning arrived swiftly. I opened my eyes to a low, unassuming hotel ceiling and the steady, comforting hum of the air conditioner. The bed beneath me was too firm, the sheets scratchy, but compared to the unforgiving concrete and freezing rain, it felt like an absolute heaven. My muscles ached from the brutal night before, but my hands, for the first time in days, were warm. I sat up slowly, wrapping the motel blanket more securely around my shoulders. I wasn't home, but I was somewhere. For now, that was enough. Vivian was already dressed, moving with purpose as she packed up her few things. She worked quickly, focused, as if she'd been meticulously planning something all night. She didn't ask how I slept. She didn't offer any small talk. She simply picked up my suitcase and stated, "We need to get moving." I followed her out to the parking lot. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue. the air thick with the heavy humidity, the distinct way Florida always smells just before noon. I slid into the passenger seat, and as soon as the door shut, she put the car in drive without a moment's hesitation. 10 minutes down the road, she pulled into a gas station, leaving the car running, and told me to wait. She returned a few minutes later with a thermos of fresh coffee, a breakfast sandwich, and a slender folder. She handed me the folder first. Inside was a crisp printout of a real estate listing, a condominium unit in Clearwater, 2 bedrooms, a breathtaking ocean view, and fully furnished. The price, a figure I could scarcely comprehend, made my stomach clench with a nervous knot. I looked at her, and she finally spoke again. "That place is yours. I bought it this morning." I couldn't say anything. My mouth stayed open for several seconds before I managed to close it, my hands clutching the folder as if it might simply disintegrate. Vivian kept her eyes steadily on the road. "I already wired the money. It's under your name. No mortgage, no tricks." I turned the page. There were photos. A spacious balcony facing the endless sea, a gleaming kitchen with granite counters, a guest room with a writing desk. It looked like the kind of place someone stayed for 2 blissful weeks every summer, not the kind of place someone like me lived in full-time. But I kept turning the pages. On the very last one was a bank receipt, documenting a deposit into a new savings account. $5 million. I looked up again. Vivian didn't flinch. "Your savings. Yours alone. I've had it set aside for years. You didn't know because I didn't tell you. Now you do." I sat back, the folder resting heavily in my lap, the coffee completely forgotten. My ears rang as if someone had set off fireworks in my chest. I couldn't form a single coherent thought. The numbers on the page were too enormous, too utterly surreal to believe. She pulled the car back onto the highway. Neither of us spoke for a long while. I watched the landscape pass by in a blur. Strip malls, swaying palm trees, cheap diners. Things looked normal, but absolutely nothing felt normal. Something profound had shifted inside me, and I couldn't yet tell if it was gratitude or shame. She turned off onto a quieter road, palm-lined and narrow. After a few blocks, we passed a grand, gated entrance. She typed in a code, and the ornate iron gate slid open slowly. A security guard waved at us, and Vivian gave a curt nod back. I kept staring straight ahead. The building itself was a low-rise, cream-colored structure with balconies trimmed in white, topped with a charming blue-tiled roofing. It looked exactly like a postcard. Vivian parked in a reserved space near the entrance. She grabbed my suitcase from the trunk and carried it inside without waiting for me. The lobby smelled distinctly of lemon and new carpet. A woman at the front desk offered a polite smile and handed Vivian a welcome packet. Vivian simply pointed at me without speaking. The woman looked at me kindly, the way people look at stray dogs they desperately wish they could help. We rode the elevator in silence. On the 3rd floor, Vivian unlocked the door to Unit 3C and pushed it open. It was brighter than I had expected. The walls were a soft beige, the couch a pale gray. Light poured in through the sliding glass doors that led to the balcony. I walked to the railing and looked out. The ocean stretched to the very edge of the sky. I could hear it, steady, heavy, alive. Behind me, Vivian placed the suitcase down, wiped her hands, and said, "This is where you live now. And I'm staying in the unit across the hall for a while, so don't get any ideas about disappearing." I turned, my hand still on the cool railing. I wanted to say thank you, but the words felt utterly inadequate, too small to convey the earthquake of emotion within me. Instead, I simply nodded once. Vivian came closer. "I know what he did. I know what they've done. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. But you will not let them take anything else from you. Not ever again." She looked me squarely in the eye, her tone sharp, devoid of sentimentality. "This place is yours. The money is yours. And I already contacted Grace." That got my full attention. Grace Hollander, her lawyer friend from college. Smart, ruthless, and meticulously careful. I hadn't seen her in years. Grace is drafting the documents now. Financial locks, legal shields. Whatever you don't want exposed will stay sealed, and whatever they try to take will be 2 steps ahead of them. I let out a slow, shaky breath. My fingers tightened around the balcony edge. Vivian's voice softened, just slightly. You're not a guest here, Helen. You're not dependent. You're the owner. And I need you to start acting like one. I stood there for a long time after she left. The ocean didn't stop moving. Neither did the whirlwind of thoughts in my head. Paul thought he had buried me, that I would quietly rot in a forgotten corner of some shelter. He thought shame would keep me silent, forever cowering. He had no idea that I was about to bury him with the very things he had so cruelly tried to steal. 3 days after I moved in, Vivian hosted a small welcome gathering at the clubhouse on the ground floor. She didn't ask if I wanted one. She simply sent me a text with the time and told me to wear something blue. She had already bought me 2 new outfits and hung them in the closet. I chose the one with long sleeves, a light fabric that didn't draw attention, but made me feel like myself again. I arrived a few minutes before 6. The room was softly lit, with an inviting array of finger foods arranged on white platters, and a stunning view of the ocean behind a row of gleaming glass windows. About a dozen people were there, mostly other residents of the building, retired couples, a few kind widows. One older man reminded me faintly of my late husband, though thinner and with a sharper chin. I didn't catch most of their names, but I immediately recognized their warmth, the kind that doesn't ask too much too soon. Vivian made sure to keep me close. She introduced me with just enough detail to be polite, never crossing into anything too personal. She never mentioned what had happened, never mentioned Paul, just told people I'd come to Clearwater for a fresh start and was now officially part of the community. Her voice had that steady, unyielding tone she used when setting firm boundaries. While she mingled, I found myself drifting to the far end of the room, near the window, watching the last light of day fade gracefully over the water. I was content not speaking. I didn't want to explain myself to strangers. It was enough, for now, to be somewhere safe, surrounded by people who didn't know the depths of what I had been through. That comfortable quiet changed abruptly when one of the building's security guards entered through a side door. He wasn't there for the party, just on patrol. He looked to be in his late 60s, with broad shoulders, close-cut gray hair, and a badge clipped neatly to his polo shirt. He made a slow, deliberate loop through the lobby, then paused when he spotted me standing near the punch bowl. I nodded politely. He walked over. He pointed to the unit number on my name tag. 3C, that's across from Miss Vivian's, right? I confirmed that it was. He smiled. She's sharp. Doesn't miss a detail. You got a good one looking out for you. He glanced toward the elevator, then lowered his voice a notch. You might want to keep an eye on the hallway traffic. We had a report of someone hanging around the mailboxes late last night. Didn't match any resident profiles. Just a heads up. That tightened something cold and hard in my chest. I thanked him and made a mental note to tell Vivian. She probably already knew anyway. Nothing ever got past her. A few minutes later, Vivian raised her glass and tapped a spoon against it. The room quieted respectfully. She made a short, simple toast. She just said she was glad I was here, and that second chances were always worth celebrating. People clapped. Someone whistled. And then the room slowly returned to its gentle hum. But I noticed the moment she ended her speech, her eyes flicked almost imperceptibly to the door. She had seen it open. I turned and saw them, too. Paul and Marissa. He wore a dress shirt he rarely bothered to iron, but this time it was pressed impeccably flat. Marissa was dressed in beige and gold, her hair perfectly curled, her heels clicking softly as she stepped into the room. They smiled as if they belonged there, as if they were welcome guests. My stomach clenched into a cold, hard knot. Vivian walked straight toward them. I didn't hear what she said, but her face made it unmistakably clear they were not invited. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cause a scene, but she blocked their path like an invisible wall of glass. Paul looked over her shoulder at me, a wide, artificial smile plastered on his face, as if none of it had ever happened, as if the last time he saw me hadn't been in the driving rain, shouting cruelties while I desperately clung to my last shred of dignity like a dying flame. I said nothing. My hand gripped the edge of the refreshment table until my knuckles turned white. Vivian motioned to someone, and a staff member quickly stepped in. The conversation was brief. Paul and Marissa stood their ground for a few seconds longer, then slowly turned and walked out. Marissa didn't even glance back. The room slowly returned to its rhythm. People had noticed the interruption, but no one asked questions. I was profoundly grateful for that small mercy. Vivian came back to my side, picked a piece of fruit from the tray, and said, "Told you they'd come." I nodded. She'd warned me earlier that morning. She had seen a comment from one of Marissa's friends online. Something too specific to be accidental. Vivian, as always, was already 3 moves ahead. After the gathering ended, she walked me back upstairs. We said goodnight in the hallway, and I slipped into my apartment. Inside, I sat on the edge of the couch and waited. Not for anything specific, just waited. They had come, not to apologize, not to explain, but to see what they could still salvage, what they could still take. But now they knew. I was not where they had left me. I was not the broken woman who had walked out into the storm with her battered suitcase. I was standing inside, protected and no longer alone. Still, I didn't feel safe enough to rest. So, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the side drawer of the hallway cabinet and pulled out a new notebook Vivian had given me. I clicked a pen and wrote one clear sentence across the top of the page. What they took from me, they will return. Then I drew a firm line underneath it and wrote 3 powerful words. House, name, power. The party had ended. The curtain was up, and they had stepped onto the stage, thinking they still controlled the story. But I had the pen now, and I was going to write the rest. Vivian didn't waste any time. 2 days after the party, she knocked on my door at 10 sharp with a stack of envelopes in one hand and her tablet in the other. Her hair was pinned up tight, and her expression told me we were long past the stage of gentle warnings. She placed everything on the kitchen counter and opened the top folder. "They're going to try again," she stated. "But this time, it's not going to be through charm. It'll be legal." I watched her lay out the pages one by one. Letters, emails, screenshots, digital dust left behind by Paul and Marissa's recent activities. Vivian had quietly paid a private investigator to monitor any financial or legal movements involving my name. What she found was subtle but unmistakable. Paul had reached out to a small law office out of state, inquiring about power of attorney transfers and elder care authorizations. Marissa had been messaging someone on Facebook Marketplace about hiring a notary for in-home documentation. Vivian tapped one of the papers. "They're going to make it look official, hand-delivered, personal. They think you're soft enough to sign something if they come in crying." She looked at me, her eyes steady and unwavering. "I need you to do exactly what I say." I didn't argue, not because I was scared, but because I understood something now that I hadn't fully accepted before. This wasn't about misunderstanding or distance. This was about cold, calculated control. Paul and Marissa didn't want to help me. They wanted what they thought I no longer deserved to manage. So I told Vivian yes, I would absolutely follow her lead. That afternoon, we invited a few neighbors over for coffee. Nothing formal, just a casual afternoon with fruit trays and pastries. Enough people to create a natural, social setting without raising any suspicion. Vivian told the concierge to let Paul and Marissa up if they showed. She hadn't invited them, but she made sure someone would buzz them in. Then she slipped a small recording device under the end table by the couch and sat down, like we were merely expecting the weather to turn. It took less than 20 minutes. A knock on the door. Vivian didn't flinch. I opened it. Paul smiled a wide, practiced grin, as if we were long-lost friends. Marissa stood directly behind him, holding a gift bag with gold tissue paper sticking out. She wore pale pink and pearls, looking perfectly composed. They had clearly rehearsed this performance. Paul stepped in first, launching into loud greetings, making forced jokes about just dropping by while they were in the area. Marissa placed the bag on the table and pulled out a tin of homemade cookies. I said, "Thank you," without any discernible emotion. Vivian watched quietly from her chair, her gaze unwavering. After 5 excruciating minutes of shallow, meaningless chatter, Paul sat forward, his hands folded neatly. "I brought something for you to look at," he said, his voice smooth. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stapled document. The front page had bold lettering across the top: Family Wellness and Property Agreement. Vivian took one swift glance at the title and calmly crossed her legs. Paul slid the papers across the table toward me. "Just something to make things smoother so we can help out, coordinate medical stuff. Ease the process in case anything urgent comes up." He smiled again, a smile that was too long, too forced. I picked up the first page and began to read, silently. It was 6 pages long. Buried deep in the middle was a paragraph labeled Temporary Power Authorization, followed closely by another labeled Financial Oversight Clause. The language was careful, not overtly predatory, but it unequivocally gave Paul full access to act on my behalf regarding medical and financial decisions. It also authorized him to open and manage bank accounts under joint access. I set the paper down. I didn't speak. Vivian stood. She walked to the kitchen, took out a second folder and returned. From it, she pulled a nearly identical document. Only this one had a stark red line drawn right through the middle. "This is a copy of the version you had drafted last week with that paralegal in California," she said, her voice cutting to Paul. "The original email is time-stamped. The language is word for word." Paul's face instantly froze. Marissa remained completely silent. Vivian turned to me. "Go ahead, Helen. Ask them what this is really for." I didn't need to. The deafening silence said everything. Vivian opened the recording app on her tablet and let it run. Then she raised her voice, just enough for the neighbors to clearly hear. "I want everyone here to know," she declared, "that this document was designed to strip Helen of her financial rights under the false guise of assistance. This is precisely what family manipulation looks like." Paul stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You don't understand what we're trying to do," he stammered. Marissa quickly grabbed his arm, her eyes wide. Vivian stayed perfectly calm. "No, I understand exactly. And so does the state of Florida. So will the ethics board. And so will the entire community you're trying to impress with your fake tears and your store-bought cookies." Paul's voice cracked with a sudden, raw edge of panic. "You're making a scene." Vivian laughed once, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "A scene? No, Paul. This is clarity." She turned to me and nodded. I walked over to the table, picked up the contract they had brought, and with deliberate, steady hands, tore it clean down the middle. The room went absolutely quiet. The neighbors, who had been murmuring softly, stopped talking altogether. Paul looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years. Fear. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I simply held up the torn pages and said, my voice barely above a whisper, "This is what happens when you mistake quiet for weakness." Vivian motioned toward the door. Paul and Marissa walked out, this time without even a backward glance. I sat down slowly, my hand still warm from the torn paper. Vivian brought me a glass of water. The neighbors murmured amongst themselves, then politely excused themselves, leaving us alone. When the room was empty, Vivian spoke in a low voice. "They'll try something else." I nodded. I knew that, too. But what they didn't know was that we were ahead now. And I wasn't just holding the line. I was ready to take everything back, piece by agonizing piece, name by name. And this time, they would never, ever see it coming. 3 mornings after I had so decisively torn their contract in half, I opened my front door to find a pristine white orchid sitting on the welcome mat. No card, no note, just the plant itself, delicate and perfect, like a silent, gutless apology that couldn't muster the courage to knock. I stood there for a long time, my gaze fixed on it, not picking it up. The air was warm, the hallway quiet. Across from me, Vivian's door opened. She stepped out, holding a cup of coffee in one hand, her phone in the other. She saw the orchid and stopped dead in her tracks. "They're switching tactics," she said, not even blinking an eye. I nodded once and left the plant exactly where it was. I stepped back inside, locked the door, and let the quiet hold. That evening, they came again, though not together this time. Paul showed up around 6 o'clock, wearing a blue polo shirt I remembered buying him for a job interview he never bothered to get. His smile was softer than usual, almost tentative. He carried a small paper bag from the Italian restaurant on Main Street. He said he figured I hadn't had dinner yet. I didn't open the screen door. He stood there for a while, talking to the barrier. He told me I looked good. He asked if I liked the neighborhood. He informed me that he and Marissa had been talking, that they felt absolutely terrible about how things had escalated. He even said he missed me. I said nothing. Eventually, he left the bag on the bench by the wall and walked away. I watched him go, never moving, a silent sentinel. The next morning, it was Marissa's turn. She showed up just before noon with a grocery bag and a book tucked casually under her arm. Her tone was lighter, almost casual, as if this was just a perfectly normal thing she always did. She didn't bring up the contract. She didn't mention the party. She just said she wanted to stop by, maybe help with errands, perhaps cook something if I was tired. She used to call me by my first name. That day she called me Mom. I watched her through the peephole until she finally left. She took the groceries with her, but left the book on the mat. A week passed like that. One would come, then the other, sometimes with food, sometimes with flowers. Once, a framed photo of Paul as a young boy, holding a fishing rod next to me on a pier, a memory they thought could be weaponized. I didn't respond, but I watched and I meticulously recorded. Vivian had given me a small device, no bigger than a car key. It sat by the door, always on when someone came near. I didn't use it to catch them saying anything overtly criminal. I used it to capture the tone, the hesitation, the subtle, insidious patterns, because their words weren't truly about repair. They were about access. Every conversation circled around comfort, then concern, and eventually logistics, bills, accounts, end-of-life planning. The insidious language of thieves pretending to be caretakers. Vivian took the recordings and shared them with Grace. Grace didn't say much at first, just listened intently, took copious notes, and asked about mail, emails, phone calls. Then she flagged something critical. Paul had requested a change of address for my bank correspondence. He'd done it online using a phone number from years ago that had once been tied to my name. Grace found it through a soft scan she had requested from a banking contact. It hadn't processed yet, but it was a glaring red flag. Vivian changed the mailbox locks the very next day. The night after that, the fire alarm in my hallway went off around 2 in the morning. No fire, just a pulled lever. Ramirez, the security guard, reviewed the camera footage and caught a blurry figure walking through the service corridor 20 minutes earlier. He couldn't make out the face, but he could clearly see the jacket, the same one Paul wore to the party. I asked Vivian to call Grace again. She brought over a laptop the following day and walked me through setting up secure digital alerts. Any access attempt to my accounts, any login from an unrecognized device, any file request tied to my name. I agreed to everything. Then I asked her if she thought they were done. She didn't answer right away. "They'll try the back door now," she finally said, her voice grave. I asked what that meant. She closed the laptop. "They'll go legal again, but not directly. They'll find someone to do it for them. A notary, a mobile witness, a financial advisor who doesn't know the full story." 2 days later, A man in khakis and a collared shirt knocked on my door. He said he was from an elder planning group, and that my family had requested a quick review of my estate plan, just to make sure everything was in order. He smiled with practiced ease, as if it were perfectly normal for women in their 70s to regularly receive surprise visits from polite strangers holding clipboards and government-style folders. I simply told him I already had a team in place and closed the door. He left quickly. Grace filed a formal complaint the next morning with the Florida State Office for Professional Guardianship. Nothing dramatic, just enough to create a meticulous record, a clear trail. I knew exactly what was happening. They were trying to make me look unstable, disorganized, vulnerable, because if they couldn't make me sign, they'd try to prove I couldn't manage. I didn't speak of it to anyone, not even Vivian. But that night, I sat at my kitchen table and reread the title deed to my condo. I ran my fingers over the raised stamp. I whispered my name out loud, not for drama, but for clarity, for affirmation. Then I placed the paper back in its folder, shut the drawer, and locked it. The doorbell rang once more that week. This time, Paul brought wine. Marissa waited patiently by the elevator. He didn't ask to come in. He asked to talk. He said things were hard. He said family should stick together. He said maybe we could talk about some practical things. I didn't open the door. I just spoke through the crack, my voice steady. "Don't come back." His voice cracked, not with sadness, but with a barely concealed rage masked as confusion. I didn't respond. I waited. He left. I went back to the kitchen, sat down, and made a list. 3 columns. What they tried, what failed, what would never be forgiven. I was no longer defending anything. I was meticulously documenting, preparing. The storm had passed, but the damage it left behind would serve as irrefutable proof, and I would be the one to carry it forward, piece by piece, until there was nothing left for them to claim. The knock came on a Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't rushed, not nervous, just steady enough to suggest familiarity. I was standing in the kitchen when I heard it. I didn't flinch. I walked slowly to the door, just like I had rehearsed with Vivian and Grace. I didn't open it right away. I checked the peephole. Paul stood there, his hands empty. No gifts, no folders, no food. That was a significant change. Behind him, Marissa waited near the elevator, pretending not to look at the door, but I could clearly see the rigid angle of her shoulder. She was listening intently. I unlocked the door, but kept the latch in place. I didn't invite him in. Paul leaned forward slightly. "I just wanted to see how you're doing," he said, his voice low, almost gentle. I stayed silent. He continued, "Things have been tense, and I get it. We crossed the line." Still, I said nothing. "I just miss you. So does Marissa. We're not proud of how we handled everything, but we want to make it right. We've been talking. We thought maybe if we showed you that we're here for you, you'd believe us." He pulled a small envelope from his back pocket and held it up. "It's nothing legal. It's just something we wrote from the heart." I reached through the crack in the door and took the envelope. Then I closed the door without a word. Inside, I opened it slowly. 2 pages handwritten. The tone was saccharine sweet, laced with manufactured guilt. Words like forgiveness, regret, rebuilding. Marissa's handwriting was on the 2nd page. She mentioned that she had enrolled in a caregiving class, that she wanted to be more helpful. She said family was the only thing that mattered now. I folded the pages, set them on the table, and pressed the small button under the edge of the counter. The small recorder clicked on. It had been sitting there for days, patiently waiting. I walked back to the door and opened it fully this time. Paul turned, a flicker of hope passing across his face. "Come in," I said. He stepped inside alone. I didn't greet him. I didn't smile. He sat at the far end of the couch, adjusted his sleeves, and looked around the room as if it were the first time he'd truly seen it. "This place is beautiful," he said. "You really settled in." I nodded once. He glanced toward the hallway. "Marissa's just downstairs. She didn't want to crowd you." I said nothing. Paul leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Look, I know we messed up, and I know you're probably never going to fully trust us again, but we are your family. We're not here to fight. We're here to fix things." He paused, letting the carefully chosen words hang in the air. "I know you've got things in place now. People helping, lawyers, whatever. Vivian lined up. But that doesn't mean you don't need us. You're still our mom. We still want to help." He looked at me, his eyes searching. "I don't want your money. I just want peace." I stood near the edge of the living room, watching him, letting the recorder capture every single word. He kept going. "I know you've got accounts set up, savings, property, all of that. And that's great. That means you're safe. It doesn't mean we can't be involved. You shouldn't have to manage everything alone." Then he shifted his tone, subtly. "I mean, what if something happens? A fall, a health scare? Don't you think it makes sense to have someone on file? Someone who can make a decision if you can't?" I turned slightly toward the kitchen, letting him keep speaking, letting him dig his own grave. "I've got paperwork. It's basic. Just lets us be listed as emergency contacts. Nothing binding, nothing financial, just access to records so we can help. That's all." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thin folder. This was the real reason he came. I didn't move. He placed the folder on the coffee table, then sat back like he had just offered something noble and benevolent. "You don't even have to look at it now. Just think about it. No pressure." I looked at the folder, pale blue, no markings on the outside. I spoke finally. "Where is Marissa right now?" He hesitated. "Downstairs in the car." "Alone," he nodded. I walked to the balcony door and pulled the curtain back, just slightly. She was there, leaning on the hood of the car, talking on her phone. I let the curtain fall. I picked up the folder, walked into the kitchen, and dropped it unceremoniously in the trash. When I returned to the living room, Paul was standing. "I didn't mean to offend you," he said. I said nothing. "I thought you'd appreciate the effort." Still nothing. "I guess Vivian got to you good." That made me pause. I stepped closer. "Vivian didn't do this," I said, my voice low and firm. "You did." Paul's jaw tensed. The mask slipped for a fleeting second, revealing the ugly rage beneath. Then he stepped forward, tried to soften his face again. "Please, just consider." I cut him off. "I already did." I opened the door. He stood there for another moment, as if he might say something else, but he didn't. He simply walked out. I shut the door behind him and locked it. Then I turned off the recorder. 2 days later, Grace came by with a printed transcript. She added it to a folder already thick with statements, photos, logs, a clear, irrefutable timeline of pressure and manipulation. Each entry meticulously dated, each line consistent. They hadn't stopped. They had simply changed shape. And now I had undeniable proof. The next time they tried anything, it wouldn't be a guessing game. It would be evidence, and it would be enough. When the envelope arrived, it came in a plain white package. No return address, no stamp, just slipped stealthily under my door like a quiet threat. I found it early that morning while making my tea, half asleep, slippers dragging across the cool floor. At first, I thought it might be another apology letter or a card from one of the ladies in the book club, but the weight of it told me otherwise. It wasn't soft. It wasn't personal. It was stiff inside. It wasn't one letter. It was 6 pages printed, stapled. Each page full of legalese designed to confuse, designed to intimidate. They had hired a lawyer, or at least they wanted me to think they had. The letter claimed that for health and safety concerns, Paul and Marissa were filing for a conservatorship review, that they had evidence of mental decline and were concerned for my well-being, and that my recent financial decisions had been erratic and might pose a danger to myself and others. I sat down slowly, rereading that line 3 times. It said my decisions were erratic. Me, the woman who ran an emergency clinic budget for over a decade. The one who handled invoices and vendor disputes while my husband worked nights. the one who stretched 2 retirements through a market crash. And they were calling me unstable. I didn't cry. I laughed. Then I picked up the phone and called Vivian. By noon, Grace was at my door with a copy of the same letter, forwarded from Vivian's office. They had tried sending it there, too, likely assuming she would panic or push me to fold. They didn't understand who Vivian truly was. Grace placed her laptop on the counter and opened a document titled Protective Response Package. It had already been in motion. Grace was just plugging in the final pieces. Transcripts, photos, the audio recording from Paul's visit, copies of the checks they had sent me weeks ago with little notes in the memo lines that said things like, just in case you need help deciding. Grace read through the letter with a practiced, critical eye, pointing out phrases clearly lifted from generic online legal templates. A few of the claims didn't even align with actual Florida law. There were missing details, misused terminology. They want to scare you, Grace said, her voice firm. This isn't about your health. It's about control. I nodded. We didn't need to file anything yet, but Grace contacted a friend at the probate court office to log the materials. If anything did surface, we would be ready. By the end of the day, Vivian had sent a formal response, worded like a velvet blade, warm but firm, the kind of letter that didn't just push back, it warned. And then I did something I hadn't planned on. I called my doctor, not because I was worried about my health, but because I wanted official records. I booked a full cognitive exam and a comprehensive wellness panel, scheduling the tests for that very same week. I passed every single one of them. My blood pressure was steady, my reflexes tight, my memory sharp, and my processing speed still faster than most people half my age. 2 days later, the results were in a neat folder in Grace's hands. I asked her to make 3 copies. I sent one to Paul. No note, no explanation, just the report itself. A week passed, then 2. No calls, no visits, no more letters under the door. I thought for a fleeting second that maybe they had finally backed down. But that was my mistake, because while I was savoring the silence, they were busy somewhere else. Vivian got the alert first. She had set up tracking through the property registrar's office. Anytime a lien inquiry or dispute was filed with my name or address, she would be immediately notified. That's how we found out they had submitted a request to the bank that held my savings account. They were trying to list themselves as co-beneficiaries. It wasn't a legal move. It was a phishing attempt, desperate and clumsy. Marissa had called, posing as me, claiming to have forgotten her online access and asking to update beneficiaries by phone. The clerk flagged it immediately. My age and voice notes didn't match. The bank froze the request and logged it, but still they tried. They didn't even care how desperate or transparent they looked anymore. I stared at the bank report for a long time that night, not angry, just quiet with a deep understanding. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about erasing me. They wanted my freedom, my dignity, my name on paper in ink beside theirs. Proof that they had power, that I needed them. Vivian and Grace arranged for the accounts to be legally sealed with third-party oversight. No new names, no new beneficiaries. Everything would automatically move to a foundation if anything happened to me, when I had already quietly set up months ago. It wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure no one could ever trap me again. Later that week, Grace handed me another envelope, thicker than the last. Inside were 2 signed affidavits from my previous landlord and a neighbor, witnesses to the nights Paul and Marissa had left me outside, refused to open their door, and told the children I was being dramatic. There was also a notarized statement from the community nurse, one who had seen my bruises when I fell. She confirmed, heartbreakingly, that no one from my family had come to pick me up from urgent care. They wanted to build a case against me. I, in turn, was already building a wall around myself. Brick by brick, paper by paper, truth by undeniable truth. And every page was sharper than the last. There was a line in Grace's summary that stuck with me, resonating deep in my core. Attackers with shallow motives underestimate the power of long memory. She was absolutely right. I remembered everything. And now, so would the court. So would the law. And soon, inevitably, so would they. The invitation came from Paul. A simple text, short and politely worded. He asked if I'd be willing to come over for dinner at their place next Sunday. He said the kids missed me. He said they'd like to start fresh. He ended the message with a hopeful line about family and forgiveness. I stared at it for a while, letting the words settle. I knew exactly what this was. I had seen it coming. Vivian had seen it. Grace had predicted it almost to the week. They had tried the legal pressure, and that had failed. The false conservatorship attempt didn't land. The beneficiary trick was exposed. And now came the charm offensive. Still, I agreed. I told him I'd be there at 6 o'clock. On Sunday, I wore a soft navy dress, the one with the high collar and long sleeves. I pinned back my hair and wore my gold watch, the one Charles had given me on our 25th anniversary. I carried nothing but a slim envelope in my handbag and my calmest, most unreadable expression. The house hadn't changed. White siding, fresh mulch, a new wreath on the door. As if any of that could disguise the lingering bitterness that clung to the very walls. Marissa greeted me with a smile stretched far too wide. Her eyes flicked over my outfit, trying to read it like a secret signal. She stepped aside, letting me in with a hand briefly on my back. Firm and controlling. The dining table was set for 7. Paul sat at the head. The kids were dressed up, their shirts too stiff for a Sunday. Their eyes darted nervously between me and their parents. We sat. We ate. The food was good, a little too perfect, a little too strained. They talked about the children's grades, about how Paul had been considering a job change. Marissa complimented the dish she had made twice, with a kind of tone that desperately needed approval. I nodded politely, responded when asked. I didn't bring up anything from the past few months. And they didn't either, not directly. But about halfway through dessert, Paul leaned back in his chair and let out a theatrical sigh. I've been thinking a lot lately, he said, about how things got complicated, and I know we all made mistakes, but I just hate the distance between us. Marissa reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. And with the kids getting older, she added, we just don't want any regrets. We want them to know what real family looks like. It was my turn to nod. I appreciate that, I said, my voice even. I really do. They smiled, a glimmer of their old confidence returning. And then Paul said it. I was wondering, Mom, if we could talk sometime about how we move forward, maybe review some of the decisions that were made when things were tense, especially regarding estate matters. There it was, the soft glove pulled off, the grasping hand beneath it reaching out again. I let the pause settle just long enough. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. Of course, I said, my voice calm. But I think it's best we're all clear, so I had something drawn up. I slid the envelope across the table. Marissa's fingers twitched before she caught herself, her smile momentarily faltering. Paul picked it up and opened it. Inside was a notarized addendum. It outlined the permanent establishment of the Ruth Ellery Foundation, the nonprofit I had formed. It confirmed that the house I now lived in, the bank accounts, the trust fund, everything was legally and irrevocably tied to the foundation. It listed the beneficiaries, a scholarship program for single mothers over 60, a care fund for elderly abuse victims, and a community medical outreach named after Charles, my late husband. Paul's face stiffened, the carefully constructed facade cracking. Marissa's smile completely vanished, replaced by a thin, bitter line. You see, I said gently, I've thought about this too a lot. And I realized I don't want to spend the rest of my life worried about who deserves what or who thinks they earned a slice of something they never built. Paul swallowed hard. I could see the heat behind his eyes, the suppressed fury. He was holding it back, desperately trying to stay in control. I'm not cutting you off, I added, my voice clear. But I am choosing peace and clarity and protection. No one said anything. The kids were frozen, confused, too young to understand the dark undercurrent, but old enough to feel the tension settle thick and heavy in the air. I stood up slowly. Dinner was lovely. Thank you. Marissa started to speak, but the words stumbled, catching in her throat. She tried to smile again, but gave up halfway, the effort too great. At the door, Paul followed me. Is this it? He said, his voice low, tinged with disbelief. I didn't stop walking. Mom, he said again, a little louder, a little sharper. We were trying to make things right. I turned back finally, standing on the threshold of their lives. No, I said, my voice unwavering. You were trying to regain access. He flinched, as if struck. But what you lost was trust, Paul, and I don't hand that out like pie at Thanksgiving. I left. Back in my car, I exhaled a breath I felt I had been holding for years. It was done. No screaming, no courtroom drama. Just the truth, meticulously documented, signed, sealed, and delivered. They had underestimated me, not just as a mother or a widow or an old woman. They had profoundly underestimated my memory, my resolve, my unyielding ability to plan. And now, for the first time in years, I slept that night without locking the door twice because they couldn't reach me anymore. Not in law, not in lies, not in my legacy. 3 days after that dinner, I woke up to the unmistakable sound of gravel crunching outside my window. I moved the curtain just slightly, not enough to be seen. Paul's truck sat in the driveway. He stayed in the cab for a moment, then got out, pacing a bit, like he hadn't quite decided what he came here to do. It was still early, not even 8. The beach fog hadn't lifted yet. The dew sat heavy on the window, like a veil between me and whatever this new attempt was. I didn't open the door. He knocked once, then twice more, each knock softer than the last. Then he simply left. 10 minutes later, a call came in. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short. His voice calm but noticeably strained. He said he respected my choice, that they would give me space, that they understood now where I stood. It almost felt civil, almost. But by afternoon, I knew something had profoundly shifted. Vivian called me, her voice tight with suppressed urgency. She had just gotten off a call from someone she knew at the clerk's office. Apparently, a new motion had been filed. Paul and Marissa were attempting to contest my mental fitness again, this time under a different clause. They were trying to use my foundation as proof that I was being manipulated financially, exploited, that I couldn't possibly be acting with full mental clarity. I didn't flinch. Vivian asked if I wanted her to respond immediately. I told her, no, not yet. Because sometimes you wait. You let people bury themselves deeper. You let the rope stretch long enough to make the fall final and inescapable. The next morning, I drove into town, not to see a lawyer, not to respond legally. I went to the bakery. Inside, the owner, Jackie, gave me a long, searching look and then smiled warmly. She was older than me by 5 years, walked with a cane, and ran the place with her granddaughter. We had talked a few times before about the community Grant I had quietly set up. I sat down with her, told her I had a proposition. That afternoon, we printed flyers. By the next day, posters were hanging in libraries, clinics, shelters. Ruth Ellery Foundation, launching community days. Free workshops, meals, consultations for older women looking to re-enter the workforce, escape isolation, protect their estates. The event was held at the town hall, just 2 blocks from Paul's insurance office. 200 people showed up. By the end of the week, the foundation was featured in the local paper, then in a regional one, then in a national blog for elder rights. I stayed quiet through it all. I didn't need to speak. Visibility, I realized, was its own powerful defense. On Friday, Grace dropped by. She had heard that Paul and Marissa were meeting with a second attorney, someone aggressive, someone loud. She warned me they weren't backing down. I smiled. I thanked her, and then I handed her a set of new documents. They weren't for me. They were for the board of the foundation, people we had carefully chosen. None of them family, all of them strong. I had signed over the house, the remaining accounts, and even my name rights to the foundation's protection clause, meaning no matter what accusation came my way, nothing could be liquidated or touched without full board approval. Grace's eyes widened as she read it. "You're sealing every single door," she breathed. I nodded. "Let them try," I said. "They're only proving my point." On Sunday, my doorbell rang again. This time it was Olivia. She was holding flowers, cheap ones, the kind you buy at a gas station in a hurry. Her eyes were soft, apologetic, but I'd learned to see through softness. It could be a weapon, just like rage. She stepped into the living room when I didn't stop her. "I didn't know they were filing again," she said, her voice small. "I swear. I just want us to go back," she added, her voice pleading, "before everything got complicated." She sat, looked around the room like she was trying to memorize it. Then came the next line, the real reason for her visit. "If there's anything we need to sign to show support, anything to put this behind us, we'll do it." And there it was. She hadn't come for reconciliation. She came to test the temperature, to see if there was still a way in. I stood. She didn't move. "I know what you're doing," I said calmly, my voice resonating with a new strength. "And I want you to remember something. This house, this peace, this life, I built it without you. I survived everything you and Paul threw at me, and I did it in silence." Her face dropped, the feigned softness evaporating. "I stayed quiet out of respect," I continued, my gaze unwavering. "But don't mistake quiet for weakness." She stood to now, her voice cracking with genuine panic. "Paul's falling apart. He's not eating. He's losing clients. He's blaming me. I'm scared." I looked at her for a long moment, seeing the fear but also the self-pity. Then I said, not cruelly, but finally, "That's not my burden anymore." She left. That night, I slept with the window open. I listened to the rhythmic murmur of the ocean like I used to with Charles. And for the first time since all of it began, I didn't feel like I was bracing for a blow. I felt done. Not defeated, but complete. Because there is a moment after the storm when silence returns, and it isn't empty, it's profoundly earned. By Monday morning, I could distinctly sense a subtle shift in the air. It was barely perceptible at first, just the way the neighborhood seemed quieter, as if holding its breath. Something was coming, and I knew it wouldn't be gentle. Vivian called just past noon. Her voice was calm but direct, radiating a controlled power. "The court date's been set," she said. "They pushed it fast. They're confident, but they made a mistake, Ruth. A big one." I didn't respond right away. I knew Vivian well enough to simply wait. "They submitted evidence," she continued, her voice gaining a steely edge. "Financial records, letters, emails, statements." She paused again, letting the silence powerfully underline what came next. "They forged your signature." I sat very still, my world narrowing to her voice. She explained. The documents Paul and Marissa had filed claimed I had granted them power of attorney for the foundation, that I had transferred the right to amend its charter. It was bold, reckless, unbelievably brazen. They had fabricated an entire meeting, a board vote, even had it notarized. Vivian had already sent the file to the forensic examiner, but she didn't stop there. She also had a quiet lunch that weekend with one of the notaries they claimed had witnessed the document. He didn't remember the meeting. He didn't remember me, because it never happened. That was the crack. And through that crack, everything unraveled. By Wednesday, the examiner's report was ready. Not only were the signatures inconsistent, but the timestamp metadata on the PDF files revealed they had been backdated sloppily, carelessly. One document was supposedly signed at a cafe in San Luis Obispo, a place that had been permanently closed for renovations at the time. Another referenced a foundation member who had stepped down 3 months earlier. They hadn't just lied. They had been lazy, hubristic. That's when Vivian made her decisive move. She filed a motion for fraud and perjury. She submitted the report, the damning witness statement from the notary, and a powerful statement from the board chair of the foundation. It wasn't just a response anymore. It was a full-blown countersuit. But it didn't end there. A day later, the county legal office reached out. Turns out, attempting to defraud a registered nonprofit isn't just a civil matter. It can be criminal. And because the foundation dealt with elder welfare, there was a second layer of protection. An automatic review had been triggered the very moment Vivian filed her countersuit. The district attorney's office wanted to talk. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I watered my plants. I baked cornbread. I walked the beach every morning before the sun was fully up. But inside, I felt a profound shift. Not anger anymore. Not even pure justice. Just absolute clarity. They had drawn the line, crossed it with abandon, painted it red with their lies, and now the whole town would see. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. I arrived early, sat calmly in the second row with Vivian beside me. The courtroom was modest, nothing like on TV, just cold air and wooden benches and a low murmur of anticipation. Paul sat 3 rows ahead with Marissa. Neither looked back. The judge was swift, efficient. He reviewed the evidence, allowed brief statements. Vivian, ever composed, laid everything out with precision. Clean, factual, undeniable. She didn't even need to raise her voice. The forensics, the witness, the timelines, all of it presented with devastating clarity. When it was Paul's turn, his lawyer fumbled, tried to claim I had authorized it verbally, that I had memory issues, that I had misunderstood. Vivian simply raised the clinic reports, clearly showing I had passed a full cognitive evaluation just a month earlier. The same report they themselves had submitted in a previous filing to argue I had the capacity to make decisions they disagreed with. They had contradicted themselves in writing twice. The judge called for a recess. Outside, I stood by the courthouse steps while Vivian spoke with the DA's representative. The sun was harsh, but I welcomed it. Let it warm the top of my head. Let it fill the sudden silence. Then I heard it. Mom. I turned. Paul was walking toward me, alone. His face was drawn, paler than I remembered. His voice softer, defeated. "You're really doing this," he said, the words barely a whisper. I looked at him, my gaze steady. "No," I said. "You did this." His shoulders slumped, like for the first time. He truly realized he couldn't shift the blame back onto me. "I didn't think it would go this far," he muttered. I nodded. "That's the thing with lines, Paul. Once you cross them, you don't get to decide where they end." He looked like he wanted to say more, but his mouth closed instead, the words unsaid. Vivian stepped up beside me. "We should head back in." We did. When the judge returned, he didn't delay. Motion granted. The forged documents were dismissed as invalid. The foundation charter was protected, secure. A referral had been made to the district attorney's office for further investigation. And with that, it was over, at least in the eyes of the court. But for me, it was something much deeper. I had stood in front of the system that once ignored women like me, brushed off our voices, assumed we were too frail or confused or overly emotional, and I had been heard. I didn't win because I yelled louder. I won because I refused to look away. I won because I kept my records, told the unvarnished truth, and trusted the silence to do its powerful work. That night, I sat on the porch with Vivian and Grace. We shared peach pie and let the gentle breeze roll in off the ocean. None of us said much. We didn't need to. The truth had spoken for us, and for once it had been enough. 2 days after the verdict, I walked through my garden with scissors in hand. The air was crisp with the first delicate bite of fall, and the sun sat lower in the sky, casting everything in a warm, amber glow. The lavender bushes had grown wild again, fragrant and untamed. I clipped them gently, bundle by bundle, letting their calming scent fill the quiet space around me. That's how I've always come back to myself, through something ordinary, something rooted. Vivian had called earlier that morning. Her tone was different now, lighter, even warm. filled with a quiet satisfaction. "County Prosecutor's Office is moving forward," she said. "Formal charges, fraud, forgery, attempted misappropriation of nonprofit assets. 3 counts." I thanked her, but inside there was no burst of joy, no triumphant fist in the air, only the calm, heavy weight of inevitability. This was never about revenge. It was always about the truth, being seen, being heard, and standing my ground when every part of me had been dismissed. Paul hadn't called since the hearing. Not a message, not a letter, not a single sign of regret. I had imagined for a long time some grand apology, a tearful phone call, a letter filled with heartfelt regret, but it never came. Instead, I received a package from his lawyer. Inside was a signed settlement form releasing any remaining claims to the foundation or the property still in my name. No note, no explanation. He had chosen silence over redemption. I accepted it, not because I forgave him, but because I no longer needed anything from him. His chapter in my life had closed long ago. He just hadn't noticed until the door locked irrevocably behind him. The next morning, I donated the last of his childhood keepsakes to the local shelter thrift shop. Not out of anger, just clarity. Some things don't need to be stored. They need to be let go. Over the following days, I began walking every morning, 3 miles at sunrise, sometimes alone, sometimes with neighbors who joined me quietly. We never talked about what happened. We didn't need to. They had watched it unfold in the papers, on television, across whispers in grocery aisles. But walking with them was a kind of unspoken respect, a quiet acknowledgement, and that was more valuable than any apology. One morning on the trail behind the orchard, I spotted a young woman sitting alone on a bench with her child. She looked tired, her shoulders slumped, like the world had sat heavily on her chest for far too long. As I passed by, she stopped me. "You're Ruth, right? The woman who fought back." I smiled gently. "I'm Ruth, yes, but I didn't fight. I just refused to vanish." Her eyes welled up with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. That was it. No more words were needed. That afternoon, I planted 3 new apple trees at the edge of my yard. I don't know if I'll live to see them bear fruit, but planting something you may never harvest yourself is a profound act of belief. Not in yourself, but in the enduring world after you. Grace visited again that weekend. We drank tea, laughed about the news segment that had comically mispronounced her name, and talked about hosting a writing workshop for retired women next spring. "Stories," she said, her eyes twinkling, "are the last thing they couldn't steal." When she left, I stood at the window and watched the wind move through the trees. The kind of wind that doesn't knock things down, but gently reminds you they can stand tall. I did not vanish. I rebuilt. I redefined. And I stayed whole. If you've ever felt dismissed, erased, or underestimated just because of your age, your silence, or your kindness, know this. You still have the power to draw the line, to reclaim your space, to plant something new, something hopeful. If my story spoke to a part of your heart today, please share this with someone who needs to hear it, too. Or just take a deep breath and remind yourself you are not done. You are not invisible. You are still writing your story. And maybe, just maybe, it's finally getting good. Thanks for watching. Take care. Good luck.